I spent hours talking to him online. Every night after the kids went to bed, after Mark went to sleep, there he was. I mean, it wasn't like he was real or anything at the beginning. More like an idea. Someone who got me. Someone who liked listening to me. And that was new, you know? Mark stopped listening to my little dramas at work, my frustrations. That was years ago. Not that I blame him, of course. It's boring stuff. But this guy, I don't know, his name is Philipe, and he just got me. We were like virtual soulmates for 10 years, crazy, right? I'd never even seen his face or heard his voice. It was all words, and somehow that worked. It was enough. We could talk about anything. The kids, problems with my mom, how much I hated cleaning that giant house all by myself. You name it. Even sex, in a way. Not dirty or anything, but like, what we wanted. What we hadn't had in forever. It's weird because Mark and I mean, things were fine. Good, even. We still had sex, not fireworks anymore, but it was alright. But Philipe, there was this whole other dimension. Like, a hunger. I never knew I had it till he came along. Then last summer, Philipe said he was going to be in Lyon. Lyon. Only like an hour away. He asked, and God, this sounds so stupid now, but he asked if we could meet. I know. What kind of a messed up situation is that, right? 10 years of talking, but we can't actually see each other. But what could I say? He was right there, so close. How could I not see what he looked like, hear his voice for real? So, I said yes. And we did. We did it. I can't even, it was like. I don't have words. Like waking up into another life, one where maybe I was a different person. A bolder person. It was wrong. I know that now, but at the moment? It felt like finding a missing part of myself. Okay, so. Afterward with Philipe, there was no, like, big moment of guilt. It wasn't like the movies where I suddenly think about Mark and burst into tears or something. Actually, things at home got better, weirdly. I felt, I don't know, lighter? Less cranky with the kids, and yeah, even with Mark. It wasn't even intentional, but suddenly I was more into sex with him. More eager. Like I wanted to explore with him. I mean, we've been together so long, it had all gotten so routine. It shocked me. I didn't know I had it in me. Mark seemed happy too. He just thought, oh good, she finally got over whatever was bothering her. Simple as that for him. The plan was to meet Philipe again as soon as possible. He had his whole business thing going on, but he was gonna come back to the area for a conference in a few months. Funny thing was, he said he didn't have feelings for me. That it was, what did he call it? A connection of the mind. Okay, fine, but I wasn't being honest with myself. Of course, I was in love with him. The whole forbidden thing, the intensity, how could I not be? Then it all got messy. Work trips turned into quick weekend visits, and visits stretched into whole stolen weeks. Not always with Philipe. Sometimes it was just me renting a little Airbnb and pretending I was at a conference or something. Mark never suspected a thing. Why would he? We were that boring old married couple, past drama, settled into a comfortable life. He trusted me, the idiot. I started making up lies like I was good at it. About late nights at the office, business dinners, even a whole fake girls' spa weekend with my sister. It was pathetic, really. But somewhere in there, it stopped being about Philipe, about the romance. It was, I don't know, this feeling of power, maybe? Like I was getting away with something huge, right under my husband's nose. I was living this double life, and honestly, I kind of loved it. The excitement of it all, the risk. It was addictive. Things had settled into this weird rhythm. Philipe when I could, lying to Mark, a new kind of thrill from sneaking around. Then it started. Slipping. I couldn't hide it as well anymore. I'd always been a good liar, turns out mostly to myself. But now, it was like I was two people. One living this normal life, making dinner, doing laundry, and the other half of me somewhere else entirely. I became so careless. Phone always buzzing with messages I'd have to scramble to hide. Excuses for being late or canceling plans with Mark at the last minute. Mark started noticing little things. The way I'd jump when my phone buzzed. The absent way I'd stare at the wall while we were talking, like my brain was a million miles away. It's funny, I got better at lying, but I got worse at being normal. He'd ask what was wrong, and I'd get all defensive, snapping about how it was nothing, how work was stressful, the usual. And of course, the more I pulled away, the more suspicious he got. One night, it all came to a head. We hadn't even fought in years, but there I was, yelling at him across the kitchen table. It was about something stupid, I honestly don't even remember what. And suddenly, he just blurts it out. Is there someone else? I went ice cold, played it off, laughed even, like it was the most ridiculous thing he'd ever said. But my heart was pounding so hard, I thought I'd throw up right there in our perfect, expensive kitchen. He didn't buy it, not fully at least. There was this look on his face, this new kind of hurt. It was worse than his anger would have been. After that, things were tense. He tried being nice, extra attentive, which honestly, only made me feel worse. Meanwhile, I had this awful knot in my stomach all the time. Then, the paranoia kicked in. He was always watching me, I swear. Checking my phone when I left the room, asking where I'd been in this careful way, looking for holes in my stories. A few weeks later, I saw him talking to someone in a parking lot. Really shady looking guy, like something out of a cheap detective movie. And just like that, I knew. Mark didn't just think I was cheating anymore. He hired someone, a professional snoop to follow me, dig into my life. Panic twisted through me, hot and sharp. It wasn't just the excitement of the double life anymore, it was real fear. I felt like I was suffocating, cornered. That same night, after I saw Mark meet with the sleazebag detective, I knew it was over. The jig was up, so I did something stupid. Something desperate. I messaged Philipe. I told him everything, about my suspicions, the detective, that our time was up. It took forever for him to answer. When he finally did, it was just one line. I don't understand. I thought we agreed this was just fun. Just fun. I laughed out loud in our empty house, a choked, ugly sound. That's all I ever was to him, a bit of excitement, a fling. Then came the knock on the door. It was Mark. His face was, I don't even know, pale, eyes like holes burned into his face. He had this thick envelope in his hand. He didn't have to say anything. I knew those were the photos, the proof. Get out, he said. His voice was so quiet, so broken. That's what hurt the most, worse than any shouting match I could imagine. I tried to talk, to explain. But the words stuck in my throat. It was all pathetic. The excuses, the apologies, even the bits of it that were true, about feeling trapped and unappreciated, or whatever. The bottom line was, I'd humiliated him, betrayed him in the deepest way. He wasn't having any of it. His voice grew louder, laced with this bitter anger I'd never heard before. You don't get it, do you? Not about me, not about us. You don't even get who you are. He was right. I didn't. He thrust the envelope into my chest, knocking me backward. He didn't have to say it. I knew. Pack your stuff and get the hell out of my house. I couldn't meet his eyes. All the fight drained out of me, replaced by this cold emptiness. I picked up the envelope and walked out, feeling the weight of his stare as I left. The night was a blur. I don't remember where I stayed. Maybe a cheap motel, maybe my car. There was a lot of crying. A lot of wishing I could undo everything. A part of me, a small, pathetic voice, hoped Mark would call, forgive me. But it never came. Just an email from a lawyer a few days later, the first step towards ending everything we built for 10 years. Just like that. I waited 2 days before going back. Pathetic, I know, but I was hoping the worst of his rage would subside. That maybe, with a little time, he'd soften. What a joke. The house felt wrong, alien. It was our house, but now it was only his. His lawyer had already been there, leaving papers that made my head hurt. Divorce, property division. Words that didn't seem real a week before. He was in the study. He didn't look up when I walked in, just kept staring at his computer. Mark, please, I started, but he cut me off. If you're here about your stuff, call the movers, he said, voice like ice. I'm paying for 1 month of storage, so they can take whatever you think you need. I just want to talk, I choked out, I can explain. He stood up then, towering over me. Explain what? How you snuck around with some faceless creep while I worked 2 jobs to build this life. How you made a fool out of me. There's nothing to explain. The begging started then. It was shameful. I pleaded, I cried, I promised anything. Change, therapy, whatever he wanted. It didn't make a dent. He'd shut down entirely. I learned then that forgiveness isn't something you can force. People talk about closure, but that's a lie too. There's no closing this mess, just the gaping absence where our life used to be. He wasn't just divorcing me, he was exiling me. My friends, his family, most took his side, and who could blame them? I became the cautionary tale, the woman whispered about at dinner parties. And Philipe, that great romance, my knight in shining armor? Ghosted. He vanished when it got real, when things got messy. His last text was, "This wasn't supposed to happen. Let's just forget it ever did." So there it was. The price of my little adventure. Loneliness, bone deep and relentless. Nights when the house echoed with empty silence, and a future I couldn't even bring myself to imagine. There's no going back, of course. There's only this new bleak existence, and the knowledge that I destroyed everything good in my life, all on my own. Months dragged by in a gray blur. I got a tiny apartment, all I could afford after the lawyers had their share. Took a crappy retail job. Ate a lot of frozen dinners and tried not to think about the life I'd thrown away. The only bright spot was, well, it wouldn't even qualify as a spot. A tiny flicker. Mark would occasionally email me, curt and businesslike, about some paperwork, a bill that needed sorting. At first, it hurt with a sharp, fresh pain every time. Then, it became just a thing that happened. Then one night I checked my junk mail, force of habit, and there it was, an email from Philipe. He was checking in, hoping I was okay, etc. Pathetic. I was mad, relieved, and disgusted all at once. I wrote back, kept it short. Turns out, Mr. Soulmate wasn't so perfect after all. A few emails later, he admitted it. He was married. Had kids. His online love affair was a bit of fantasy, a way to escape his dull life. Just like me. What a fool I'd been, strung along like a puppet. And the worst part was, it was almost a relief. It meant I wasn't completely crazy. The whole thing was built on a lie from the start. Somehow this made me a victim again, at least in my own warped thinking. The next email I sent was to Mark. Attached was my whole, sordid confession. Who Philipe was, our 10 years of online whatever it was, every dirty detail. Why? I don't know. Spite? A plea for more punishment? Some pathetic hope that revealing the full ugliness of my betrayal would make him understand? I got a call a few hours later. His voice was different. Tired. Older somehow. He told me to come back to the house. That we needed to talk. He'd found out, somehow, about Philipe's little family. He didn't say how. I didn't care. It was all out there. He was disgusted, sure, but there was a hint of something else. Pity, maybe? He wasn't the type to gloat, even after what I'd done. Why didn't you leave, if you were so unhappy? He asked. That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? The one I still don't have a good answer to. We talked for hours, and when it was finally done, it turned out the answer didn't matter as much anymore. He said he could try to forgive me. Not that it would ever be the same. But try. For some reason I don't deserve. Something in him couldn't just write off 10 years completely. Foolish, probably. He's a better man than me, that's for sure. The first few nights back in my old bedroom were hell. I slept on the couch, or tried to. Mostly I just stared at the stupid floral curtains and thought about every lie I'd ever told in that room. Every time Mark was asleep beside me, trusting me completely, while I was sneaking around with that creep. Sleep, when it finally came, was worse. Nightmares twisted everything. Mark's face was Philipe's, grinning at me. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding like it would burst. Even when I was awake, the shame was never far away. It clung to me, a rotten smell I couldn't wash off. Mark insisted on therapy. At first, it was just awkward silences. Or me crying, him sitting there, stony-faced. Our therapist, bless her, got us talking somehow. About stupid stuff at first, bad childhood memories, old fights. And through that, we started actually seeing each other again. Not the betrayed husband and the cheating wife, just people who used to love each other, and maybe, just maybe, could find a way back. Then the bomb dropped. Philipe's wife found out. I don't know how. Maybe he confessed to save his own hide, the coward. The next thing I knew, she was waiting in the grocery store parking lot, screaming insults and spitting on my car. A crowd gathered. You bet someone filmed it and put it online. Our small town loves a good scandal. Suddenly I was the pariah. People crossing the street to avoid me, muttered whispers when I was forced to go out. This time it was different. Before, Mark had my back. Now, half the town saw him as a pathetic fool for even letting me back in the door. He tried to shield me, bless him. But he couldn't fight the whole world. The looks of pity, The judgment in his eyes when I opened yet another hate email. Those were worse than any public shaming. And worst of all was the fear. What if this broke him? What if he finally snapped and threw me out again? Only this time I'd have nowhere to go, no one to turn to. It made him colder, that's for sure. We were walking a tightrope, both of us. There were nights when I'd see him looking at his phone, hesitate before setting it down. That same sinking feeling would hit me. Was he finding comfort somewhere else? Was he giving up on me, on us, the way I deserved? I couldn't have blamed him, but God. The thought of losing him all over again was almost too much to bear. Therapy became this stupid game we played. He'd say how hurt he was. I'd say how sorry I was. We'd go around in circles, never actually getting anywhere. I could tell Mark was trying harder than he ever had for anything. But there was this wall between us now. A concrete wall with barbed wire on top, and no matter how sorry I was, I couldn't climb it. I didn't blame him for that. One night, it all came out. Everything that had been simmering since I moved back in. How he couldn't look at me without seeing him, picturing us. How even though he wanted to trust me, the doubt lingered. Was I texting some other man right then? Was this all just a game, waiting for my next escape? The worst part was, he wasn't wrong. I knew myself too well now. There'd always be that part of me, the reckless, selfish part. And now it had proof. It knew it could get away with it, survive it, maybe even get a second chance if it played its cards right. And that knowledge, it was a poison in our marriage. A week later, I packed my bags again. There was no yelling this time, just a quiet resignation on both our faces. An admitting of defeat. The movers came, took the furniture. The lawyer made sure my share of whatever was left was small, a fitting punishment. I moved away, far away. Took a crappy room in a rundown apartment complex. A fitting place for me. Mark visits sometimes. We talk on the phone more than you'd expect. The kids, well, they'll always be his kids. He doesn't blame me for that, even if he should. As for Philipe, the great love of my life, turns out his marriage didn't blow up like mine. He apologized via email for not being available to support me during this difficult time. He's living his perfect little life, while I'm picking up the pieces of mine. It's not fair, but who said life was? People want happy endings, or at the very least, a lesson at the end of the story. This isn't that kind of story. It's a messy one about broken people doing stupid things and leaving a trail of wreckage behind. There's regret, sure, but also anger and bitterness and a kind of hollow feeling, like a part of me got scooped out and never grew back. I guess that's the price you pay for being the kind of person who could do the things I've done. They say time heals all wounds. It's a lie. The pain of what I did never really goes away. It shifts, changes shape, becomes a dull ache instead of a sharp stab. But it's always there, lurking in the background. Even years later, sometimes I'll be going about my day, doing laundry, paying bills, whatever normal people do, and it hits me. I'll think about Mark, the kids, what they might be doing right then. I'll close my eyes and picture our old house, smell the stupid lemon cleaner I always used in the kitchen. A wave of regret and shame will wash over me strong enough to knock me down if I'm not careful. It's not just missing my old life. It's knowing why it's gone. I did this to myself. Every lie, every stupid choice I made brought me to this point, this half-existence. My therapist had a lot of fancy words about self-sabotage and broken attachment styles, but the truth is simpler. I wasn't a good person then. Maybe I'm not a good person now. It's lonely, being me. Sure. I made some new friends through work, but it's all surfaces. They don't know the real me, the one capable of hurting people the way I did. Sometimes I think about telling someone, just so I'm not the only one who carries the weight of it. But then I think about the look in their eyes when I confess, and what's the point? They'll never see me the same way again. The other day, I ran into one of Mark's old friends at the grocery store. I avoided her at first, but she practically cornered me. She asked how I was, then about Mark. Awkward isn't a strong enough word for it. Finally, she hinted about rumors she'd heard, about how things ended between us. I just said things didn't work out. It was the truth, just not the whole truth. I guess that's my life now. Half-truths and the lingering consequences of big mistakes. There's no fixing what I did, and no going back. All I can do is keep going, day by day. Maybe things get a little less bleak at some point. Or maybe they don't. Maybe all I'll ever be is the woman who threw everything away, and this is the price